My first call that night was from a room that had been empty for hours. "Nurse," the voice said, soft and thin like paper. "Can you help me?" That's how it starts, with one small, polite request that's the wrong kind of familiar. My name is Mara. I work the night shift on MedSurg at St. Vincent's. 12-hour stretches, fluorescent lights that never turn off, and a voice on the phone that keeps you awake even on your days off. I've been a nurse for 7 years. Nights taught me to listen for the small things. A cough, a creak, a machine skipping a beat. Those small things save lives. That night I was on the 3rd consecutive overnight. The day team had discharged most of the wards. We were down to the slow ones, the kind that breathe quietly and keep you company until dawn. Room 512 was a single bed facing a window. Mr. Harold Ellis had been admitted 2 days earlier. Old heart, SOPD, stubbornly kind. He coded late afternoon and passed despite everything. The doctors signed the chart, the body was moved, and the room was cleaned. By midnight, it should have been empty and silent. That's when the desk phone rang. My coworker pressed the speaker, and the line filled the station with a thin, elderly voice. "Nurse, are you there?" It asked. First I thought it was a wrong number. Phones ring at 3 in the morning for every reason under the sun. But the caller ID read, Room 512. I smiled, the kind of smile you give when you think you've caught a sleepy patient calling for water, and said, "This is Mara. Who am I speaking to?" There was a pause, like someone searching for a name behind a fog. "Harold," the voice said. "It's cold. I can't find him." "Mr. Ellis. You were discharged," I said, meaning the wrong thing entirely. "The family took him in. He's..." The line clicked. Silence. Then the voice, almost a whisper. "Please don't forget me." You can feel the hair on your arms lift when someone says your name with a kind of pleading that isn't rational. That's what it felt like. I checked the chart. The sign-off was there. I asked the aide who had been on shift. Everything routine. I called the front desk to make sure there was no misdirected line. Nothing. No calls from 512 should have been possible. Still, the phone kept ringing through the early morning. Not every 10 minutes, not persistently, but often enough to make the space between rings feel suspiciously alive. I began documenting. I logged each call time, the tone, the phrasing. The voice was getting clearer. Sometimes a cough mid-sentence. Sometimes a sigh that sounded like someone sitting up on the other side of life. The first week of recordings I wrote in my report read like a tired person's checklist. The second week, the tone of the calls started to change. On the third night, the call came just after 2. It was Mr. Ellis again. "Mara," he said. "Do you have the picture?" Picture. I had no idea what he meant. I asked, "What picture, Mr. Ellis?" He sighed. "The one with the hat." I glanced at the sidebar file. Mr. Ellis's wife had brought photographs when he was admitted. A small Polaroid of him at a summer picnic. Hat tilted, squinting into sunlight. We had taped it to the wall near his bed for company. I made a mental note and went to check the room. Doors were locked. No footsteps in the hallway. The room was empty, the bed made. The tape outline on the wall where the picture had been was clean and dry. The Polaroid was not on the wall. I asked the aide who checked rooms. She said they had removed personal items when the family claimed the body. When I returned to the desk, the phone was on mute. I had time to look at the monitor. On the call log, the number came from the nurse station's internal extension. meaning the call had originated somewhere inside the hospital. The part that made my skin crawl, the voice knew the picture's detail. Nobody else knew that Polaroid's hat detail. It was a detail in a private box. How did it know? The calls escalated slowly. Not jumpy screams, but persistent small things that break you down. The voice on the phone calling the wrong name, the lights flickering when I answered, monitors beeping softly on their own. First I chalked it up to fatigue. Night shifts do strange things to your sleep cycle. You dream in half sentences and hallucinate the smell of coffee when there's none. But then Mr. Ellis started asking for things that had never been in his room. "Bring me the blue sweater," he'd say. "There's a radio on the shelf, I can't find the knob." He'd ask about people who weren't on his chart. One night he asked, "Did you see the man at the window?" And when I laughed, nervous, he became very quiet. "He's fragile," he said. "Don't wake him." On my break I stared at the staff lounge wall, the list of codes, the schedule, and understood like a slow freeze how thin the membrane between rational and other things can become when you work nights. The calls weren't loud. They were intimate intrusions, the type that promised to tell a secret if you pick up again. The midpoint of that stretch was the night everything moved. It was 3:17 a.m., a time that will always feel wrong to me. The phone rang. Answered. "Mara," the voice said, so close now I could have sworn someone was whispering into my ear. "He's awake. He's trying to get up." I ran to 512. The door had been checked and locked 3 hours prior. When I swiped my badge through, the lights inside were normal, the bed empty. But on the bedside table, where the family photo used to be, lay a small hospital bracelet twisted open. Not a patient bracelet, but one of those little name bands nurses put on when they're practicing. My hands were shaking. I picked it up, and a smear of ash dusted my fingers. As I stood there, the corridor lights dimmed until they were only the color of old film. Down the hall, the housekeeping cart rolled slowly of its own accord, and stopped at the entrance to 512. The cart's plastic bag, the black garbage bag, clung to the edge and then slid off like something trying to make a sound. There was no one pushing the cart. That night, the call log showed multiple calls from 512 between 3:10 and 3:20, back to back to back, even though the room had been empty and the family confirmed they had left that afternoon. The line was active, and on the recording at the very end, you could hear a second voice under Mr. Ellis's, a small childlike breathing, and then a laugh that was not human. I started to talk to other nurses, quietly at the ends of halls where you trade secrets and lies. I asked them if they'd heard anything. Some had felt the room get cold. One nurse swore that when she passed 512 late at night, the window blinds were moving although there was no breeze. I pulled the camera footage for the unit. We have hallway cams. I scrubbed through hours of grainy night vision. Most nights showed the same empty corridor and the occasional cleaning cart. The night of the cluster, the footage showed a black smudge near 512 that didn't correspond to a walking figure. It looked like a shadow folding over itself. When I slowed it down, the pixels arranged into a shape like a person holding something small to its chest. Security shrugged and said the cameras have noise, it happens. Administration told me to file an incident report if I felt unsafe. They asked if I'd been resting between calls. They offered a day shift swap. They smiled in the way committees smile when they don't want to do anything. None of this should have felt personal, but the calls chipped at something in me that had been brittle for a long time. My grandfather had died 2 years before, upstairs in a hospice bed. I had sat with him through the night and listened to machines and whispered the stupid jokes he liked. When he passed, I promised never to let anyone be alone when it mattered. So hearing a voice on our line say, "Don't forget me," felt like a hand on a half-healed scar. One night he said, "Do you know where I left my watch?" I laughed then, because the watch had been a joke between him and his wife years ago. But I told him I'd look. I wasn't sure I even believed my own voice. That night when I checked the med cart, the small watch, the kind with a leather band, was on top, stopped at 3:17. I don't want to make it sound romantic. It's not romantic. It's the kind of helplessness that makes you check your light switches twice. As days became a pattern of calls and empty rooms, the edges of my life narrowed. Friends called and I couldn't keep the story straight. "Do you want to hear something weird?" Always sounded smaller than it did inside me. At home, I would set my phone down and see the timestamp of 3:17 reflected against the glass and start to imagine footsteps outside my apartment door. I began to dream in hospital corridors. I would wake reaching for a badge that wasn't there. My hands would shake in the middle of an 4 line. We make small mistakes when we're tired. A mislabeled syringe, an overlooked note. One night I forgot to log a routine vitals check because the phone rang and the voice asked if I could find someone named Ruth. The next morning, a family complained we hadn't caught a small fever. The guilt gnawed. The staff checked my hours. They asked if I wanted time off. I told them no. Where would I go? The voice waited regardless. The crisis came quietly. It was a rain night. The fluorescent lights hummed a restless song. The station phone rang, blurred and thin. Answered. "Mara," the voice said, and now it was urgently human. "He's cold. He's leaving." "I'm coming," I said. I went to 512. I stood at the doorway and told it to speak if there was someone. Nothing. The room was as clean as a chapel. The window framed the dark city. For a single heartbeat, I could almost see the shape of a man by the bed, like a curtain in the corner. Then the phone in my hand buzzed. Another call, the same line. The monitor in the empty room began to pick up a faint rhythm, not from a human body but from something in the walls. I put my hand on the bed and felt cold. Not the ambient chill of the night, but a bone-deep cold like touching the inside of ice. "Who is he?" I asked stupid questions into nothing. And then, so close I could feel whispering air against my ear, the voice answered. "He remembers what you did." I stumbled backward and everything turned into a sequence of small motions. The cart that had been stopped slid forward, a framed certificate fell from the wall and shattered, the corridor lights blinked out, and then came a sound like someone sobbing. Not the kind of human grief we give to each other, but a sound that belonged to the fabric of memory. Called security. I called the charge nurse. The cameras showed nothing but a night cleaner pushing a mop. When the family came in the morning, someone apologized. They were confused, said their week had been busy, but they weren't angry. People want neat endings. I didn't have one to offer. I went home after morning report and stared at the ceiling until noon. I thought about quitting. I thought about leaving nursing entirely. But then my phone lit. A simple text from the aide who'd been on that night. "You're not the only one who hears him. Don't go alone next week." When the night comes now, I keep the desk phone unmuted. I leave a chair pulled close. I answer because the voice on the line knows details about people who aren't supposed to be remembered. I answer because sometimes the living need an audience and the dead sometimes need someone to be there as they work on finishing things most of us cannot imagine. At 3:17 a.m., the phone still rings sometimes. Pick it up, I say, Harold. And I always listen.